I remember that bit.
What became of this professor, Mrs. Tucker?
The Phantom of the Opera has a score by Edwin Astley, who was born in Warrington in Cheshire in 1922. He was a man who knew an awful lot about jazz and was in his own dance band. He also had worked with Vera Lynn as well, but he's most famous, I suppose, for the music he wrote for British television series like Danger Man, Department S, The Saint, and all these used what we know as an ostinato, or a repeated idea that gives a great sense of driving energy to the music, repeating and repeating while the tune goes on top of it. He often also liked to use the harpsichord, which was a sort of vogue instrument in the 60s, kind of cool timbre, which is rather odd, using an old instrument like that to suggest coolness, but nonetheless it works very well. So some of the things he did, this is the theme for Department S, which has this ostinato, and over the top of that really driving piece, which was actually turned into a single by Cyril Stapleton, the dance band leader, about whom Michael Carreras made a short, actually, for Hammer, the Cyril Stapleton show band. Danger Man, similarly. You've got a driving ostinato for that, and for The Saint. And that keeps repeating and repeating and repeating, so the whole thing is an ostinato, really. So he's famous for those things, but he did write film scores as well, and this is one of his most ambitious, really. It fits into the category, really, of movies that are about music. There are lots of those sort of movies, and they required from the composers who scored them the impression of either a concerto or an opera, a mini opera, or what became known in Hollywood as really potted concertos, mini concertos. The most famous of those really is the Warsaw Concerto by Richard Adinsel in the film Dangerous Moonlight. It's not really a concerto, but it's sort of imitating the gestures and harmonies of Rachmaninoff, really. There are others, such as Deception, which has a score by Erich Wolfgang Korngold, which starred Paul Henreid and Betty Davis, and Paul Henreid plays a cellist. So there's a sort of potted cello concerto in this piece, which Korngold did eventually turn into a full-fledged concerto. There's Hangover Square, about a crazed pianist. So again, Hermann wrote what he called later his Concerto Macabre, but originally it just starts out as an impression of a concert piece. So there are lots of films that are like that, and I think Phantom of the Opera fits into that because there are operatic scenes in this Hammer adaptation. My favourite line of one of the scenes is, "You lousy Frenchie, you think this is a joke." It's a strange line for an opera, but nonetheless, Edwin Astley does create this impression of there being an opera in progress, even though you only see little bits of it and hear little bits of it. The whole film is really a reworking of an earlier version of this famous story, which originally had been filmed in the 20s with Lon Chaney, which followed the original book by Gaston Leroux quite faithfully. The remake, which was in the 1940s, 1943, starred Claude Rains as the Phantom and had Nelson Eddy as well in it. And it was sort of vehicle for operatic lollipops, really. A lot of the action was taken up with performing pieces of well-known music, as well as the underscore. So this film of Hammer's kind of looks to that. The story is similar to the Claude Rains version about a composer who feels his music's been stolen and then gets hideously disfigured by acid. Well, that's not in the original novel. So the Hammer film version is reworking that Claude Rains film. So we've got all sorts of other pieces of music in the film, as well as Edwin Astley's score. We have an audition scene where they're singing Mendelssohn's On Wings of Song. There's a little bit of the Fledermaus of Strauss, and Schubert's Ave Maria is also part of the mix. So there's little bits of classical music to enjoy as well. And the story is about the character played by Michael Gough, Lord Ambrose, who steals Professor Petrie, played by Herbert Lom. He steals his opera and all his other music from him. He's a sort of lecherous Harvey Weinstein figure, really, this Lord Ambrose, who believed in the casting couch big time. And I think it's a very good part to describe the way in which opera might have been put on in the 19th century. It was rather like a kind of 19th century Hollywood, really, the operatic world. The action is based in London rather than in Paris, so they didn't have to go to the expense of rebuilding the Paris Opera House. It's a rather more modest theatre. And it starts off with shots of the Phantom playing his organ underneath the theatre, or in his watery lair. So what do we hear? Well, we do hear this strange sound in the organ. It sounds even stranger when it's played by the organ. In fact, what we're hearing is the love theme, the big aria theme from the imaginary opera of Joan of Arc, which will be developed later on, but it's just in embryo, right at the beginning, just to tell you what's awaiting us. This love theme was turned into a single released by Choral Records and arranged by a man called Stanley Paul, who gave it a kind of Liberace treatment with a piano playing the tune and a big orchestra accompanying it. Thought I might play it for you now. He also uses a weird vocal line as well, which you do hear in the original score in the movie. If you imagine that sung by a wailing lady, it does have a certain frisson to it. Well, you don't hear that in the movie. That's the full arrangement for this record. But the tune is the same, and it is the big aria of this Joan of Arc opera.
What did you say? Stop it! Stop it, I say!
Lord Ambrose, who seems to like stealing other people's music, is also keen on sacking people. He, at one stage, sacks the singers, and he sacks the director and the manager and everybody.
You're dismissed! They're all dismissed!
Which has an interesting parallel to what happened to Hammer's music director, Philip Martell. Originally, Hammer had John Hollingsworth doing the music. Around the time of Phantom of the Opera, John Hollingsworth died. Philip Martell was poised to take over. Edwin Astley, who wrote the music for this, of course, actually did conduct his own music, so Philip wasn't involved. But I remember Philip telling me, back in the 50s, he was working on Otto Preminger's adaptation of St. Joan, and he was required to help Misha Spoliansky, who was writing the score, with the music. And they thought, we need a special sound for when Joan hears voices. And someone suggested they use the syrinx, the panpipes. So they flew someone over from Romania at great expense, apparently, put him in a hotel, and he played something to Phil. He said, well, that's very nice. Can he play this now? Here's the main theme of the film. And the man couldn't read music, so they had to teach the guy to play this tune, and it was all rather problematic. But while he was working on this film, apparently Preminger wanted Philip Martell on set every day, all the time, even if he wasn't doing anything. And Phil said, I can't do that, I've got lots of other things to do. So Preminger fired him. So he went home, and the following day someone rang up and said, where are you, Phil? We need you. And he said, oh, Preminger's just fired me. He said, oh, don't worry, he's fired the lighting man, the carpenters, he's fired everyone, just come back, you know. So there's an interesting parallel in Phil's experience of being fired with what Ambrose does to all the people in this movie.
You too! And you!
So that's the main love theme of the film. The main title starts very dramatically like this. what do we have here? Well, here we have this famous interval that horror films can't do without, the tritone, or the devil in music. It's all over the place, really. It starts off with that, this sound, the trilling sound in the top, and then a chord which highlights that sound. A voice will sing a tritone too. These intervals are sung by this wailing voice, and then a xylophone will emphasize it down below. So we know we're in frightening territory. Then things get a bit more agitated, and we have underneath sounding very sinister. So he's using lots of cliches in a sense, but making them work very well. And we'll have this voice again, wailing away on semitones as the main title finishes, and then going right up to a top C, which is very operatic, and then a sort of glissando for the voice, and the whole main title will end on this frightening tritone sound. So you know what kind of a movie you're in for. This is about being scared. The little opera scene, or the various little opera scenes, it starts off, I think, with a sort of anticipation of Jaws, John Williams' Jaws theme. And then the singer then says silence, but it's a sort of preempting of Jaws, I always like to think. But the main theme of the film is this love theme, and it keeps coming back in muted ways. You hear these 4 notes often, all the way through the movie. Particularly when Christina is in her dressing room, just before she's going to be abducted and taken to the Phantom's lair, you hear it underscoring the action. And you go into the Phantom's lair. And what is he playing? Well, he's actually playing Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which again is a sort of a cliche of Phantom of the Opera movies. Some people think this wasn't actually written for the organ at all, probably just written for a string instrument like a violin. Some people don't think it's even written by Bach, but nonetheless it's associated with him. And why is it so suitable for this sort of a movie? Well, it's in a minor key to begin with, that's always a good start. But then it gets very exciting. Right down in the low registers of the organ, you build up this chord. And this chord is known as a diminished 7th chord, often used in silent movies to accompany ladies tied to railway tracks. Perfect. It's sometimes also known as the Clapham Junction chord. I once attended a lecture by Anthony Hopkins, not the actor but the musicologist, and he called it the Clapham Junction chord, because it doesn't belong in any key, but if you change one of its notes you can get to any key from it. So for instance, if you did that, slip down the top note by a semitone, you can get into A flat major. If you slip the 3rd note down, you can get into F. And if you slip the 2nd note down, you can get into D. So you can get anywhere you like from it, but it doesn't really belong anywhere. So that's one of the reasons why it's so frightening. The other reason why it's so frightening is it consists of 2 interlocked tritones, so 2 devils playing together. No wonder people like to use the Bach Toccata and Fugue in Phantom of the Opera movies, because it's got that particular chord in it. So this is a very different score from Edwin Astley's TV career, really, with all those spy dramas. This is an operatic and melodramatic score, which works really well.